call to order the planning. I call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. I call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. May I have a roll call, please?
Eric here.
Lynn here.
Amanda here.
Jeff here.
And Michael and Daryl are in traffic and may not make it. So excused absence.
For traffic.
Semi rolled over.
Because both westbound lanes are closed. I pledge
allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all. Okay. Do I have a motion for approval of the agenda this evening? Are there any corrections or changes? No.
Make a motion to approve the agenda for this evening's meeting of January 22nd, 2025.
May I have a second?
I second.
Motion by Amanda, second by Eric. All in favor?
Aye.
Approval of minutes. Have everybody read them? Has everybody read them?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any corrections or changes or additions or eliminations? Okay, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of January 8th, 2025?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. Second.
Motion by Eric, second by Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Does anybody have any declarations of conflict of interest? None. Public comment. Citizens are invited to comment on any item on the agenda, not on the agenda, subject to a public hearing. Please limit your comments to 5 minutes per person unless arrangements have been made. We have a hand in the audience tonight. Please state your name and address, sir.
Okay. Hawkeye Flaherty, 162 Main Street. And I came up to apologize to the commission for my rude, rowdy, and obnoxious behavior at the last meeting. My emotions got the best of me. I was very frustrated, but I had no right to take it out on you. So to the staff, Scott and Madison, I do apologize. Madam Chairman, I do apologize for my behavior, and to the Planning Commission and everyone else, I sincerely apologize for the way I acted and my lack of professionalism. So I really do appreciate all my years of service at the town. I realize that this is the toughest job in the town, dealing with people and their property and what they want to do. And I do always appreciate your efforts and your time that you do this. Because as I said, this is the toughest job in the town. So thank you for all your service. Thank you for your time. And again, I do apologize for my obnoxious behavior.
And you get a gold star, because in all the years I've been here, you're the first one who's given us an apology.
Thank you, Hawkeye.
Thanks,
Good
Hawkeye.
night.
Thanks,
Thank
Hawkeye.
you.
Appreciate it.
Have a good night, Hawkeye.
Yeah.
You too. Good luck.
Thanks. Oh. Next on the agenda.
Hey, anyone else? Anyone else?
Oh, public. Is there anybody? No. Okay. Design review. Oh, special presentations, none. Design review land use public hearing 0226 Miles in Lane. Changes to approved plans for single family residents. Madison, you're presenting?
Yes. So if this address sounds familiar, it's because it is. Y'all have already reviewed and approved a set of plans for 226 Miles in Lane. However, submitted back to us were plans that had changed largely enough that, or in a fashion enough that it was not appropriate to approve them through minor DRB like we have other changes. So the main things that changed were essentially increased footprint and therefore increased building lot coverage on the property, and that footprint is attributed to, I believe, a front porch extension, and then exterior materials have changed a bit. So due to the fact that the building coverage changed from what was approved, this is something that is back under y'all's purview and not staff approvable. So that's why it's back before you tonight.
Can I ask just one question? I may have said it, my mind was focusing on different things. With this increase, it does not exceed the current.
Does not.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions of staff?
That was my question, like it's still way below the maximum amount.
Jeff? Amanda?
No problem.
Does anybody want to beat the timer? Anybody have a motion?
I need public comment too.
Oh, public comment. Is there anybody in the audience for public comment? No. Anybody on Zoom for public comment?
Nope.
Okay.
I make a motion to approve the revised plans.
Close public comment, sorry.
Yes.
I make a motion to approve, revised plans as presented as they mostly comply with our guidelines for 0 to 26 miles on line.
May I have a second, please?
I second.
Motion by Amanda, second by Eric. Now, roll call vote.
Eric, I.
Lynn, aye.
Amanda, aye.
Jeff, I.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I am assuming you were here for that.
I sure was.
2 minutes.
Thanks for driving all the way here.
You're so welcome. You guys stay warm.
Yes,
Thank
you.
you.
Good night.
Do we have Matt online?
I think so.
Discussion direction items, midterm forward land use code update.
I'm here.
Hello, Matt. So Matt is with us tonight. We continue to work diligently on, God, it's starting to feel like whack-a-mole because we're still working on Article 5, cleaning up some stuff. We're still working on Article 8. We just sent a pretty clean draft of Article 8, incorporating some of your comments and revising it after additional review internally, and sent that off to the town attorney and to Jeff Spinell. 2 days ago, we're going to give them 2 weeks to review it, and then we'll have a meeting with them and make sure that we're capturing any of their comments. In the meantime, Matt has been working on Article 11, which has to do with annexation and disconnection. So we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. And then there's one issue that we still just don't feel quite right about, and that is minor PUD amendments. And so we want to bring that back and have that conversation again with you, with some additional examples of other towns that allow for different types of administratively approved PUD amendments with some guardrails. So with that, Matt, thanks for joining us. Do you want to take it from there?
Yeah. So what I will do quickly is walk through the memo that was provided in your packet. And as Scott noted, we're still working on some revisions to Article 8, which is the article that addresses different types of subdivision applications and the different types of review procedures that go along with those applications. And so we're not quite at a point yet where we're ready to bring back the full revised version of that article for you guys to take a look at. But we did just want to provide you with a quick update on kind of some of the key changes that we're working on. And I'll just, again, these are sort of bulleted in the memo, but I'll walk through those, see if there's any questions or comments. First is we're working to improve the overall purpose language for Article 8. The language that was included in the initial draft was pulled from the existing code, and there's some issues with that language. Specifically, it doesn't really address subdivisions of buildings. So we're working to improve that and make it clear, try and improve the clarity as to why that whole article exists. Second is detailing the review process for exemption plats, minor subdivisions, and major subdivision sketch plans. These were sections of Article 8 that were omitted from the initial draft that you guys took a look at a month or so ago because we were still working on them. We've got those pretty dialed in at this point. We just want the town attorney to take a look at those. But that has been something we've been working on. Related to that, the initial draft had some public notice requirements that were missing. So we've, and those were for duplex, condominium, or townhome subdivisions, exemption plats, and minor subdivisions. So we've clarified those, and those are now detailed in the revised draft that we'll be bringing back to you. The exemption plat section was missing from the initial draft, so we've spent some good time working on detailing the purpose statement for that section, the submittal requirements, review criteria, and as well as the review process. Based on input from the Planning Commission, we've added the following requirements for duplex, condominium, or townhome subdivision. The first being that an application for that type of subdivision cannot be submitted to the town until the framing of all party walls is complete. And we've noted, just as a side note, that we need to be sure that the definition of party walls in the updated code makes it clear that that includes both shared walls as well as shared floors and ceilings, so that's clear that it's not just walls. It's also, if you're in a condominium building, it's if you share a ceiling or floor with your neighbor above or below you, that also is included in the definition of a party wall. And secondly, and this was a recommendation of the Planning Commission, we've included language that states any subdivision of a building must comply with all other applicable requirements of the town's municipal code, and sort of specifically building and electrical codes. We have incorporated language for minor subdivisions, and that the language we've worked on includes applicability criteria, submittal requirements, review criteria, and the review process for minor subdivisions. And as that language is currently drafted, are the criteria for minor subdivisions that we've crafted will limit minor subdivisions to subdivisions that create no more than 6 lots, that don't require the dedication of public right-of-way for streets or alleys. They don't require the construction, extension, and or dedication of public improvement, except for curb, gutter, and or sidewalks. And that property to be subdivided is only eligible for the minor subdivision process if it was not created by a previously approved minor subdivision. So the idea there is that you only get to use the minor subdivision process once.
And Matt, can I
Yep.
expound on that just a second? And we may have talked about this before, but and that's so we can not have people try to avoid going through a major subdivision where we would normally get engineered plans for roads and utilities and stuff. If they keep kind of doing little minor subdivisions to get around that regulation or that part of our code, this would then stop them from doing that. Does that make sense? Yes.
Some subdivisions in town, like where I feel like for the plat says minor subdivision on it, but it might have been done in the 60s. Would that apply? Like if the lots were done back then or in the 70s, 80s, let's say, but the lots were big enough to still subdivide further and still meet the code.
Right.
What?
Good question.
Yeah.
My response to that would be yes. It would. This restriction would still apply. The idea is, as Scott said, if the minor subdivision process is allowed to be used over and over again, somebody could take a 10-acre parcel or property, subdivide it in half, and then somebody could go in the future take that 5-acre parcel, subdivided into 2.5 acre parcels. And so you just keep, if you're allowed to use this process over and over again, you can keep subdividing your property. So it's smaller and smaller and smaller. At the end of the day, you ultimately end up with what is really a major subdivision. So that, again, that's as Scott explained, that's the idea behind this restriction is it doesn't allow people to use this as a loophole to get around the major subdivision process, where you kind of are looking at a more complex subdivision and need more detailed information versus a minor subdivision, which is really intended to be kind of a simple and straightforward process or project.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question.
Yep.
1, 2, 3, 4, fifth bullet point down. And then the sub-bullet point, an application cannot be submitted until the framing of all party walls is completed. Application for the subdivision, I assume, but how can the party walls be completed if?
So when they're building a condominium or a duplex, they're framing up the walls. Oftentimes they'll start from the inside out. You know, they'll frame up and Jeff, you tell me if that's correct, but they'll start with the party wall, the two common walls between two units, or I think what Matt was trying to describe in a condominium where you're subdividing airspace. You're not subdividing land underneath the unit, you're just getting a unit, right? The second floor unit or the third floor unit. The party wall is the wall that exists between two separate units, and they usually have framing and other requirements from a building code standpoint, like 1 hour fire separation using certain types of gypsum or gypboard, drywall. That's what we're talking about. So you frame those up, and then the surveyor shoots his points according to the walls that have been constructed, so it's as accurate as possible. We have been asked in the past to allow for surveyors to do their work and shoot in the location of party walls between two units before they're framed up based on the foundation design. That's something I've seen requested before.
When it says an application cannot be submitted.
That's what threw
What
me.
is the application?
The subdivision.
Of the building.
Of the building.
No, the subdivision of the building, yes.
Okay, maybe
And the
put
building can
subdivision.
start being built prior to the subdivision.
I see
of
what you're
that
saying.
building.
So I just went on a rant
Because
and
when
I
it-
didn't need to. I do that so
Well,
often.
the word application is what threw me also.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there might not be a better way to clarify that in that sentence somehow.
A subdivision application, a minor or
Yeah.
a condominium duplex or
Yeah.
townhome subdivision application. I think don't, maybe not
Building
get so,
applicant, yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I
no,
think
it's not the building.
It's not the building application.
The
And
building permit's already been issued.
it'll be more clear
When we get into the code.
in the code, in Article 8.
Well, it's probably inherently, because of where this language sits in the code itself, specific to
It will follow
subdivisions.
through.
It's kind of like, you're not gonna just stumble on that by chance.
Because, when I just read this, I'm like, how can you have an application
Well, here's an
for a
example.
building out that's already got walls that hasn't been applied for?
No, here's an example.
It was going in circles.
You buy a bigger lot and you want to build a duplex and you plan on owning it forever. And you just fill out your application to build the building. It's all engineered. You fill out the application, you get the building permit, you start the foundation, you start to frame it, and then you go, I think I'm going to sell half of it to someone else. You have to subdivide it to sell half of it. And you weren't intending to do that when you pulled the building permit. So now you're still framing it. You go and you fill out the application to subdivide it. And what this portion of the code is saying is, what used to happen is you could send the surveyor out while the foundation was still there in the dirt. And they would kind of go, I think the party wall is going to be here. And they would draw it and stamp it. And that would be where the subdivision is. And what this is saying is they want it to be more precise. They want those walls framed. Then the surveyor shoots those walls. plots them, puts them on a map, and then it's more accurate. I can guarantee the planning department is gonna get pushback from developers, surveyors that, you know, wanna get in there and do it when they have the opportunity to do it or whatever. It's a timing thing, right? But
I'm gonna just say that's.
it'd be a lot easier to enforce if it's in the code.
It's pretty, I mean, you're gonna have to have those exterior walls for your ILC anyway.
Mhm.
So, and you're gonna have to have eaves and roof lines for an ILC as well, so they're gonna have to come back out anyway.
And to clarify, as Scott mentioned, and I've dealt with this as well, is you do have developers who come in when they've poured their foundation and say, I want to start subdividing, and they have a surveyor go out and do their work and draw up a legal description for the units, and then the party wall is constructed later, and it may not be where it needs to be, it may be crooked. So having the framing in place ensures a more accurate survey work and a more accurate legal description. And I know, Scott, to your point, I mean, there may be pushback, but I don't know that waiting until framing's done to do this subdivision process really delays anything. I mean, it shouldn't, the idea is that this is a pretty straightforward and ideally efficient process. So it may take a few months, but while you're going through the subdivision process, you can still be working on drywall, electrical, I mean, all that stuff so I don't see this as delaying,
Oh, you'd be
really
surprised
causing
that-
delays. No, I know.
the
I'm
reasons-
aware.
Yeah.
But I do, again, this was something I suggested based on my experience. I think having this codified just makes it clear to anybody who comes in that look, you can't do this until your walls are framed, and so that there's no town staff doesn't have to say, oh, you need to wait. It can just point to the code and say, look, this is a requirement. Sorry.
And, certainly as part of our pre-application and/or building permit process, we can make people who are building duplexes or condos or townhomes aware that we're anticipating you're going to subdivide these when they're built and ready to be sold. Here's what you need to know, and have that on a checklist of, getting people ready for a minor subdivision. Or I call them minor because that's how they're categorized in other jurisdictions. But we're calling them duplex, condo, and townhome subdivisions. So we can preempt some of that just in pre-application meetings or with checklists and stuff like that.
Transparency.
Yep.
Anybody else have something? Amanda?
Yeah, no questions for
Eric?
me.
I just was gonna comment, I don't know if we're down to the part where we're looking at the town of Telluride and the
No,
town of.
not yet.
Not yet.
Coming up.
Okay.
So just to wrap up the minor subdivision items. So we were talking about duplex, condominium, townhome subdivisions. I'll go back to minor subdivisions. And these minor subdivisions, as Scott noted, in the existing code, there's type A and type B, and they apply to different types of subdivisions. What we're recommending or suggesting in the updated code is minor subdivisions now will only apply to a subdivision of land, and we've pulled out condominiums, townhomes, and duplexes as a separate type of application. In the existing code, condos are lumped under they're I think type B type of minor subdivision. So I think hopefully this makes the code more user friendly by kind of pulling out condos as a separate type of application. And just to wrap up minor subdivisions, in the existing code, minor subdivisions are handled via an administrative process. And so as proposed, minor subdivisions will continue to be reviewed and decided on via an administrative process. The last few bullet points here under this first item, Other changes we're working on for Article 8 is incorporating purpose statement, submittal requirements, review criteria, and a review process for major subdivision sketch plans. Again, this was another section that was omitted from the initial draft of Article 8 that you guys saw a month or so ago. And the reason for that is we were still working on that section. So that'll be included when we bring a revised draft back to you. That'll be in there. We've worked to improve the review criteria for major subdivision preliminary plats. And then the town engineer has provided us with a detailed list of engineering requirements for preliminary plats and final plats. So we've been working to incorporate those into the list of submittal requirements for preliminary plats and final plats, with the hopes of making it very clear to applicants what sort of engineering documents and reports are going to be required and what level of detail needs to be included with those plans and reports. So that's all. Again, this was intended just to give you guys a quick update of where things are at with the revised draft of Article 8 that we hope to be bringing back to you here in the next month.
Anybody have anything else on that section? No? Okay, Matt, go on.
All right.
Thank you.
So the next item in the memo is minor PUD amendments, and minor PUD amendments live in Article 5. And the reason we wanted to bring this back to you all is we felt that there might be interest in having further discussion about this. If we misread that, I apologize. We're not trying to beat a dead horse here. So I'll just go through this quickly and then we can have a bit of a discussion. So where we're at right now, the revised language that kind of where we landed with minor PUD amendments is they're limited to changes that are necessary to address technical or engineering considerations discovered during the development of the PUD that could not have been reasonably anticipated during the approval process. And so that means right now the minor PUD amendments section of the updated code, that's what it's limited to. So all other changes that if somebody needs to come in with their PUD and make any other changes, they have to go through the major PUD amendment process, which is a significantly more intensive process. And the minor PUD amendments section right now is handled via administrative review process. And major PUD amendments require going through a review with the Planning Commission and Town Council. So the reason, again, one of the reasons we thought it might be valuable to talk about this further is we're a bit concerned that the limited scope of minor PUD amendments could be overly cumbersome for other types of minor modifications that might be made to an approved PUD other than technical or engineering considerations. So we wanted to have a bit of a discussion with you all to see if there's any interest in maybe modifying the minor PUD amendment allowances. And in the memo, we thought it might be helpful to provide some examples where a developer might need to make some minor modifications to their PUD after it's been approved. And those could include improving the PUD's conformance with best practices, new technology, or if there are new code requirements that then maybe there's some benefit for that, for having them come into compliance with. There might be, the developer might, after their PUD is approved, be in the process of developing their PUD and realize, you know, there might be some changes, some minor changes I'd like to make to improve the design of the project. With PUDs that are developed over many years, the market might change and a developer might need to make some minor tweaks to how many dwelling units they have or how much square footage they have for commercial or industrial. types of uses. And again, those sorts of market changes, the idea there being that they would be minor changes. If it's a total overhaul of the PUD, that would definitely need to go through major PUD amendment process. And then there's some minor modifications that might need to be made to improve the financial feasibility of the PUD. I've dealt with this a number of times with where developers get their approvals. They kind of go out and talk to the banks and really start to fine tune their numbers, and they realize that there's some changes that they may need to make to make their project financially feasible. So those are just a handful of examples of why a developer might need to make some minor tweaks to their PUD after it's been approved. There are probably other examples out there, but we wanted to offer at least a few to better explain why there might be that need. And in addition to that, the memo includes examples from other communities of minor changes that they allow through their minor PUD amendment process. And I won't walk through all of these, but there's examples from Telluride, the town of Eagle, Glenwood Springs, and Carbondale. And I think what's important to note about these examples is they set parameters on how much flexibility there is through the minor PUD amendment process. So they've said, we're going to allow you to make these minor changes to your approved PUD, but there's a limit on sort of how significant these changes can be. And if you need to exceed those, you have to go through the major PUD amendment process. So I will stop there. And Scott, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add, but open to hearing any comments or questions.
Eric, go first this time. Eric, you said you had questions, so go ahead.
Oh, I was just looking at the size of Midturn and the ability to grow. I feel like we're closer to a town of Telluride that's limited in its growth process to kind of reflect more what they're doing than the town of Eagle and Glenwood have more space to grow. But I mean, if we do a combination of these different modifications, I think that's the best bet.
Sure. I'm having lots of concerns and lots of ifs, but also lots of questions. So currently, our minor PUD is 6 units, correct? Or I mean, that's what it's going to be.
That's a minor subdivision.
Subdivision. So what's the minor PUD amount?
Well, this is a minor PUD amendment. So if someone gets approval for a PUD, and they might take a couple of years to actually build it.
So it doesn't matter the size of the PUD, okay?
No, okay. It's just the minor is the process. So a minor process or an administrative process versus a major process, which is, as Matt explained in his memo and tonight, if we have a very limited scope of what constitutes a minor change that staff can administratively review and approve, and everything else is a major, that basically kicks someone into they go back through the preliminary plan stage. It's like starting over with a PUD, where we can ask for the whole laundry list of additional civil engineering plans, studies, the whole thing. It goes right back through that same kind of process, which is time consuming for them and for the town and costly. So that's why we're bringing this back. But hopefully that clarifies. We're not talking about the size of the PUD or the size of the changes necessarily. When we're talking about minor, we're talking about the process.
And
So, first of all, you are correct. We are not the big towns. Eagle has 7,400 people. Glenwood has 10,000 people. I checked into that. At least I checked into those two I was able to. Our town is 1,000 people. We're probably going to double that within the next few years. with your 40 units and Belden's 40 units and 40 houses over there, at least 25%, 50%. But my concerns on this are the fact that, number one, if you were to approve them and not pass them before us, that's not transparent to the people out there who have already approved or gone through the process in this room with us. I don't think all of these are good suggestions for us, like increasing buildings 10%. So that is 10% of, say, of Jeff's, let's use yours, that's 42 units. That would be 4.25 units you could add on, which increases the density of that property, and not knowing where that property is or what that property, I mean, we're talking hyperbole here. Is that the correct word?
I guess I don't take that 10% to be increasing units. I take it to be increasing a building size.
Now, okay, but it does in here say something about, in one of these, it says something about buildings. It does say that. So that's my next thing. When it says building size, is that if they have the extra space allotted to them, still following the code. So if somebody gives us a building that is allowed to be 3,000 square feet, and they're only building 2,500 square feet, and then we give them 10%, that's another 300, that's 2,800 square feet. I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with going over and creating a more dense parcel, because that, to me, is not transparent to the public.
I get that.
And that worries me. I don't want to sit here in the future, well, if I'm lucky enough to sit here in the future, and have to have arguments. You know, the one that came in on yours, I thoroughly understood. He's on the river. He bought that lot with an understanding of what that river is. You wanted 5 feet and back. I was okay with that. You know, first of all, you're back against open space. That wasn't an argument that I could work with. I saw the clarity of that. But I think by going through these, and they're different ones, I think we have to really have better examples before us if we do this somehow. I mean, because we don't know what we're referring to. We're referring to a project that hasn't started yet, an HOA that hasn't come out with regulations yet. It's very out there. You know, like I just gave you an example, and that clarity in my mind, I'm okay with that. But if that extra 10% took it up to 3,300 feet, which then boosts the lot coverage of that particular house over the current code, I have an issue with it. And that's just one of them. I mean, we're going to talk about these, and you're probably going to get some better ideas. But that was, you know, I don't mind the way the code reads with Scott doing that. And I don't mind if you do others, if we can talk through them and all agree on which ones we're choosing. But these buildings, these examples are really big towns compared to us. And you're right, Telluride is probably the closest. So I don't see how we can look at, you think of looking at Glenwood Springs in some ways, because they have large acres of parcels that they can do this on, or spacing, maybe not left, but.
Yeah. To that, I would just say I'm not sure if the overall size of a town geographically or the population is the most pertinent reason or way to look at this.
But it's increasing density, which
It is.
it could be. And that's where we're going to wind up into issues.
I think, well, Matt, I don't know if you have thoughts on that. It really has to do with the design of the PUD, not the size of the town. And if a PUD is reviewed and there's a level of intensity of development, and that has to do with the density and how many square feet or acres of open space there is versus the number of units, you know, a dense development versus a more spread out wide. It has more to do with the individual design of the project itself. And a lot of times when there's some discretion given and there's language in a code that says it can be a minor PUD if it doesn't, you know, fundamentally change the character of the PUD. It doesn't fundamentally increase the or decrease the amount of open space. Sometimes that's just a non-starter. If you're decreasing the amount of open space, you can't go through the minor PUD amendment. I've seen that in codes.
I agree.
Or
But
decreasing like local housing, like.
yeah,
That's part of the beauty. Like, I would like to see it more that direction than this direction, so, I mean,
Yeah,
But,
I have
like-
trouble with the decreases in here also.
Telluride's example, using 1% increase in the number of dwelling units applied to Midtown Village, that's 0.42 units. That's not even an entire unit, right? So that doesn't really give much latitude. If it was 5%, what are we talking? Maybe an unit and a half. It's not a huge change, and it's not going to have a substantial impact on traffic or the density or the character of the development. So those, I mean, I've certainly reviewed a ton of PUD amendments in my time, mostly at Eagle County, because there's 80 some PUDs approved in Eagle County, and they always came in for amendments because they were these multi-year PUDs. Arrowhead, Beaver Creek, Bachelor Gulch, Cordillera Valley Club, they're all PUDs, and they all changed over time. Or someone 20 years hence came to us and said, this doesn't work anymore. You know, for whatever reason, if it's, you know, a better design, or the market's changed, or they don't have any more water because the sanitation district, or whatever it is. Like I've seen a lot of different PUD amendments. Anyways, I'll stop there.
So, and I'm gonna take something you said. The decrease in open space and parks, I'm not for. The decrease, it doesn't say decrease in parking, but it does say change in parking. Decreasing in parking would not be something I'm open for. I don't mind with the moving of a street more than 2 feet, but the next line says increasing the ground coverage for all proposed structures by no more than 3%. Well, if you increase the ground coverage of the whole PUD, not more than 3%, it's hard for me to fathom that because I don't have an example in front of me. So that would be something I want us to be really sure we're being careful with. Floor area of proposed structures. You know, as long as it remains within the HOA code and remains within the Minchard code as far as coverage and height go, I don't mind. It's like this that came in tonight. To me, that's one of these examples. That was a good one to have on the same thing because they're only adding 400 square feet and they still have the space to do it. I don't mind that. I don't mind Scott going and doing that. The only question I have is, to me, it somehow needs to be transparent to the people. And we've done this with some of the things like Madison with decks or fences, where they can make the decision, but they come to this meeting and announce it so that we know what the decision has been made. And that's one thing that I request.
Yeah, and I think that was
Rather than
going to be inherent that
Yeah,
it-
well, rather than going straight to council, which I assume you'll have to do. No,
I think we could build into the process any stops here and council that you want to see. I think that's what we
and
were
then they
expecting.
could call it up if they wanted.
Yeah.
Before it zips.
Mhm.
So people don't have to come in here and go through all of us asking, that I can work with. I mean, and I shouldn't say it that way, that I would understand. I just don't believe that some of these things, because it is going to eventually probably somehow, and it may never happen, we may never have a lot more PUDs, we don't have the land. But I don't want people feeling like in some of these other things where it's affecting the neighbors, that kind of thing. So it all is gonna depend on what you choose from here and how it's presented. I question 10%, period. I'd rather see it kept to the lower end of that, but it depends on what you're talking about. Some of these are 2 and 3, some are 10, some are 5. Okay, you got my gist. It's Amanda's turn.
Oh, yes, it is. So I maybe interpreted this staff memo just slightly different than Lynn. So I thought you guys were asking for us to be okay with you guys to explore some of the spaces where you could have a minor PUD approval. I didn't realize that maybe that this was your list, and I think it was just like, hey, like, can we explore this and bring you back a couple options? Because I think
Right.
last time we met, it was a hard no, like we're wanting to see everything. So I'm good with us exploring. I think to Lynn's point, when you bring back maybe more of the solid areas that you feel like would be good, to have a couple examples. I agree with Lynn on that space. And then the other piece would be, let's make sure not to include anything that could potentially appear to go against the Minturn community plan, like, or that would even have a loophole to go against the community plan, like I said,
Okay.
you know, locals housing or parking or mobility, like some of those things. So just be conscientious of that out there so that we don't upset our community. We have this. That's it for me.
And I think that is the spirit in which this was presented, was let's at least tee this up for another discussion, and if you want us to come back with better examples, we can do that.
Yeah, we've got a
And
lot.
I'll just, sorry, go ahead.
Hold on, Matt. I'm sorry. Can we let Jeff go first and then we'll listen to your thoughts? Go ahead.
Well, I guess the only thing a couple things. One is making whatever language is in here. I mean, what we're talking about is a threshold, right? So it's a threshold of where is the line in the sand of a major and a minor. That's really the issue.
Yeah.
And we went through this arguably with Minturn North, you know, where back in the day when Greg was presenting his plan, it went back, a new plan came in. One could argue that it was a major change. One could argue that it was a minor change. I think that obviously those days or that project is gone, but the threshold of when something comes back to Madison and Scott and it's a change, like you're saying, what is the criteria to decide which side of the line is on? And we want that, and I know the plan department's spirit or intention of this is to not have that line be grayed by being super subjective. Right? So that's the hardest part, or the hardest challenge, I think, is to get the language written in a way that doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room for interpretation. So I think from my perspective, the more clear it can be to determine whether something is a major change or a minor change, because it either checks these boxes off or it doesn't check these boxes off, is if there's a bunch of things that are being proposed that don't fit in the box that's been written, that's where I think it gets hard. Because at that point, then it's like, well, we didn't think about that, or it's not really spelled out, or that falls in between the lines or whatever, and we're trying to get away from that. So I guess that would be my suggestion, is to try to make the lines of determination as to whether it's a major or a minor, and that whatever meets that threshold be as clear as possible. And then to Lynn's point, if it whatever falls under the line of being a minor, what this part of what we're discussing tonight is up for the staff to decide, not us to decide. But then I think you had a good point of it. I think the most important thing is that the public know. So even though it's a minor, let's say it falls underneath the threshold and it's going to be a minor change and it's going to be staff approved, you still have to notice the neighbors, or
You have to have it on our agenda.
it still has to show up on the agenda that it's going to be approved at the council tonight, but it gets noticed 10 days ahead of time. All the pertinent letters go out, even though it's a minor, it still goes out, still gets noticed. It still theoretically creates some buzz, creates some talk amongst the neighbors. People want to come out and speak at public comment that night, or whether or not it gets pulled or ratified on the council consent agenda, at least it's been put out there, right?
Yeah, it's, I can just see what would happen if it were another project like over there with Taylor Street. He made these changes we didn't know about, so we couldn't come to this meeting.
Yeah, but I think we're
trying to avoid.
Yeah, and I know that we're trying to look in the crystal ball and say like, we obviously don't want to have another unit show up that wasn't discussed, or more density, or less parking, or
Yeah.
less open space, or all this. But I think in the spirit of what comes from Scott's side or Madison's side is like, plans get drawn up and all of a sudden the road has to move over 6 inches. Well, because you went out and surveyed it, you had your engineers draw it up, you had the locates done, and all of a sudden you found out, well, boy, there's something in the ground there that we didn't anticipate, and we're going to have to move the road over just a little bit. Well, do we need to have a bunch of meetings about that? Probably not. Nobody really, is it going to change the overall look of the project? No. So I think that's more in the spirit of what Scott's talking about. But making sure that bigger problems don't slip in between the cracks, or there's some loophole, like you said.
Yeah, the guardrails are
The
there.
guardrails are there.
Yeah.
So.
But you guys are gonna come back with the points, yeah.
We're not doing all of these, you're gonna go through them.
No,
Then it talks about modifying the number of location of vehicular access points. Is that only within the PUD? Where Jeff has got an access point to the highway and he's under control of what CDOT says, so how does that work?
well, so that would probably involve CDOT, right? But it has to do with the PUD as it was approved with one access point. What if CDOT, as a new director, they change all their policies and say, now we want you to have 2 access points,
But
right?
But to your point, like, let's just say we're talking about, a project that's not accessing a major US highway, but it's accessing private roads or town
Correct, like over there.
roads.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, all of a sudden, PUD gets approved and 5 years go by and they don't build anything, and then they go, okay, we're gonna build something, but now we actually changed it a little bit and we wanna have another road that goes and loops around here and does this and that, because it creates better, vehicular traffic, or now there's a bike lane.
The
or
fire
whatever.
district
The fire district decided
wants it.
that they, didn't like it at the last minute, and they took a last look, and those things, I don't know, like, those aren't major in my book, but they could be if it was, again, you don't want it to be super subjective where one person can go, well, I think this is a major problem. This is a major change. And another person goes, this is no big deal. It looks the same to me. You have 2 people that are completely disagreeing on something that's just subjective, right? And we don't want what they're doing to be subjective.
And I think there would always, to your point, I think there always would be the ability of the planning director or the town manager, somebody to say, this isn't, if you're adding another access point, you're going to fundamentally change the traffic patterns in this neighborhood, bringing it back, right? Maybe we're also not thinking of an interim step where if it's not minor, but it's also really not major, I don't want to create another process, but maybe there's a process within the major that allows for a limited scope, a major light. There's a waiver of certain things because nothing else is changing except for that access point, as an example. So we need a new traffic study. We need sign off from the fire district. We need whatever, right? Maybe that's an option for us too. I don't know. I don't want to make this more complicated, but.
No, and right now, we could do that easily by just talking about these. We don't need to. You have the gist of what we're saying.
Yep.
Keep it limited. Keep it accessible to the public. Keep it so that if it gets here and we go, I don't know, we can maybe call it up like council does when they have things like that.
Yep.
Somehow. But you can do most of the legwork before and get it done faster.
Well, maybe there's just a backdoor clause in there that says if there's enough public interest, that the planning department can call it, refer it to the planning commission to discuss.
I think there would always be an appeal process for someone, either an applicant or someone off the street.
So you make a staff determination, you allow something to change, a minor change, and then there's something in the code that provides for them to appeal.
So
I still think it needs to go on the agenda, giving the public a chance to come here and say something.
we have a process that Matt has built into the new code where if we make an administrative decision, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I thought we built this process where an admin decision gets publicly noticed. There's a period of time when neighbors can either object or figure out what's going on. And then if it does meet opposition, then it gets called up or goes to a different process. Is that correct, Matt?
That's correct, but I think that only applies to minor design review decisions.
Okay.
For where we're at right now with minor PUD amendments as it's in the updated code right now, minor PUD amendments, because they're limited to technical or engineering related changes, those are decided on by the planning director. There's no public notice requirements. Again, because the scope of what we had talked about was so limited that they're really kind of technical changes. If we expand the scope of what's allowed through a minor PUD amendment, we probably need to look at, based on what I've been hearing, some different public notice requirements. And then I think what would be helpful is direction from the Planning Commission as to whether, I mean, again, the minor PUD amendment process right now is handled by the planning director. I don't know if we want that to have to go through a more intensive process where it has to go in front of the Planning Commission and council as well.
Kind of defeats the purpose.
But there could be some, like, Madison does with some of the administrative decisions that she does. She brings them before you and it shows up on an agenda and we talk about it, right? So, and that's where you get to the call up provision. So, Matt,
I just feel like we are far apart in terms of what you guys have brought up as points to be really concerned about, and what Matt and Scott are talking about. Technical issues are not what you're talking about.
no, and I think that was the reason for providing some examples of what other towns are comfortable with, right? If some of those might be palatable to the Planning Commission, we can come back with some of those and make a proposal to say, this is, from these examples, here's what we feel like you and we might be comfortable with. And go from there.
Okay.
And provide some examples. I think I would probably choose some existing PUDs that we've approved and use those as examples. If we're comfortable as staff making administrative decisions to increase the amount of building square footage or lot coverage by 2%, what does that mean in Minturn North? What would that mean in Midtown Valley or Belden? We've got those.
And that's good because it'll be easy for us to visualize.
Yep.
Well, and conversely, it could go the other way. Things could be reduced in size.
Correct.
Things could be, my 16-unit apartment building could turn, they're all 2-bedroom. Maybe the market says that they won't support 2 bedrooms. Maybe it wants 1 bedrooms. And maybe the square footage needs to be reduced. Maybe the whole building needs to be smaller because it's just too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make a huge difference in the PUD? Probably not. Just a little smaller building, a little less impact, but some people might go, well, that's a huge difference. I don't know, right?
Okay.
So are there any of these examples listed in the memo that the Planning Commission feels are just, there's no way we'd ever allow that through a minor PUD amendment process? I think that direction might help us craft a draft of what we could include as minor PUD amendments. But if there's any of these that you guys are just like, no way, I think that direction would be helpful if you feel like you can give that to us at this time.
I have a question before I answer that. Modifying the gross square footage of non-residential building area as long as the area does not increase by more than 10%. You're referring to something like commercial?
Mhm.
Yep.
So then above, it says modifying the number of residential units as long as the number of units does not increase by more. But there was one other where it talks about the change between residential and here, modifying the ratio of residential units to square feet of non-residential building area in the PUD. Can you explain that one a little bit?
Yeah, so that would be if you had a PUD, a mixed use PUD where there's a residential component and a commercial or industrial component. So say you have a PUD like that and you have 10,000 square feet of commercial space that gets approved and 20 residential or dwelling units. And so you decide, maybe the market shifts and you decide instead of having 20 residential units, I prefer to do 16 units instead and increase the square footage of my commercial space. So the idea with this allowance is you could make some minor modifications to the ratio of the number of dwelling units or residential units in your project to commercial or industrial space. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it explains to me better than when I read it. Thank you.
Yep.
I have, my major thing I think would be not reducing open space and parks and that type of thing. I wouldn't want to see that. I wouldn't want to see reducing parking for the buildings. If we're going to allow them to get bigger, then we need to do it. I mean, they did it with four parking spots on each house, and it worked out without going over the code. It just is a matter of people working that way, I guess. Do you have anything you don't want to see?
No. That's,
Amanda?
I think I've already communicated what I
Okay.
would like.
Jeff?
I'm good.
Okay.
So out of the list of examples, anything seem appropriate that we should come back with? Whether we're focusing on specific percentages or not, modifying. I get the picture that we don't want to, maybe we write that in there, like, reduction of open space is a non-starter. Things that don't qualify as minor, reduction of open space, reduction of affordable housing units. We can probably come up with some more, but within that list of examples, some percentage increase in the number of residential dwelling units.
Again, I think Telluride is.
I think using Telluride as the example rather
Okay.
than Glenwood is a lot better.
Yeah. I feel like also Telluride is a little bit more clear on what can be brought through versus some of these with like modifying this and it just feels like it's
Yes,
More
it's very
straightforward.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think Telluride is clear to the.
Okay. Sorry to push you on that. I think it just helps us come back with something usable and
No, anytime you get into ratios, let's just stay away from that.
Do you agree with the Telluride, Jeff?
Yeah.
That's four of us there.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly appreciate you entertaining us once more on this. I know it was kind of a clear direction last time. Obviously, we think this is pretty important. We don't have that many PUDs, but the ones that we do have might make life a little more clear and a little easier for folks in the future. We got kind of chastised on the record at council last week when we were bringing the resolution of approval and ordinance for the resolution for approval of Midtown, and talking to the council about the long road that you had to travel. Council member Rodine was not happy that it took that long, or he at least expressed it as, boy, if we really care about housing, why are we taking so long? And he kind of looked at staff like, So and this goes back to our initial, one of our goals with this project was to find efficiencies and flexibility in our code not to make things easier on people, but to make the process more understandable and more efficient for everybody. But that's a balance with transparency and good decision-making and not one person making a decision in a bubble. So anyways, thanks for entertaining that conversation. And
Another person read through something else in their own time called water.
Just a small.
Just a small thing, but just
that
a
too,
small thing.
that too. All right, Matt, we've got a couple more things to just update the Planning Commission on. What's coming next?
Yeah. And actually, before we move on, Scott, when you were talking about affordable housing, a thought popped into my head. I just want to throw this out there. When we are looking at allowed changes under a minor PUD amendment process, would there be any interest in maybe allowing a greater increase? Again, not a huge change, but maybe a greater increase in the number of residential units in a PUD if those are quote unquote affordable housing units. So we could say, if you're just changing market rate dwelling units, you're pretty limited, like Telluride is 1%. But say if you're going to make changes that increase the number of affordable units, maybe we'll let you change that by up to 5% through the minor PUD amendment process. Kind of an incentive. Just curious.
That was one of the issues I had with the previous Midterm North, was it started out at 1 and it kept getting bigger because of additional dwelling units. But the other night, when they were talking about working on the process of short-term rentals, it was multiple times brought up that if the person was living in the house full-time and part of that house was rented out, that's something I could see working with, where you weren't, necessarily increasing them, but if the house could be part of that. In other words, if somebody lived there and they were renting something attached to the house, kind of like Ryan Sipes, his house, he had that unit downstairs.
Yeah.
The house at the end of the street by me has that. I'd be more for that than perhaps more density. No.
Not
This
me.
is no.
I'm
Because you'd be the landlord.
I'm just. I bite my lips.
I don't have a problem. I mean, if you're talking about 5% density increase to get more affordable housing, the reality is what does that mean? One extra unit?
Short-term housing.
No, affordable.
No. I'm talking about using that in long term.
So if it was
talking about it, and that's what brought it to my mind.
if it was a deed restricted
sorry.
affordable unit, it would not be short-term rented.
Correct.
We don't allow that
Can't do
now.
that.
So
So to answer your question, Matt, yes, I would be in favor of that. Because,
Okay.
But again, if it's 1.7 children, what's 0.7 children, right? So
Right.
0.5 units or 1/2 of a unit does nothing. So if it's one extra unit in a PUD, that, 5% increase is not that much in my book.
But what if that PUD is 100 units?
Show me where we can do that in town.
I know. But I mean,
The school
let's
district
make
maybe.
sure that's not something somebody can
That's the
jump to.
next, maybe,
School district.
or maybe,
it's not going to be a PUD.
right,
We're already reviewing
Right.
it as a subdivision.
maybe Battle Mountain, maybe Tim McGuire's project.
Mhm.
But again, 100 units, 5%, 5 more units, great. Why not?
And if you get to that scale of 100 units, is 5 really that noticeable?
It's not going to have an impact most likely on the traffic impact report.
But we'll have a big impact on 5 affordable units.
Correct.
To me, that's a big resounding yes.
That's the positive.
Thanks for bringing that up, Matt. Sounds like we need to build around that, perhaps.
Okay. All right. Well, unless there's anything else about minor PUD amendments, we just have a couple quick updates about next steps for this whole process of updating the code. So I'll get into that unless there's anything else related to minor PUD amendments. In terms of upcoming articles or sections of the code that we're going to bring in front of the Planning Commission in the next month or so, as we've mentioned, we hope to have a revised draft of Article 8 for you after the town attorney has had a chance to go through that and provide comment. And then also, as Scott mentioned, we want to bring an initial draft of Article 11, which deals with annexation and disconnection of land. Article 11 is not going to be the most exciting article because it's largely driven by state statute. But it is an important one, an important article to kind of get dialed in correctly. So those are the two articles that we're looking to bring in front of you shortly. And once we get through those two articles, the first chunk or module of the land use code update will be completed. So that'll be a pretty major milestone. And then once we get through that, we're working on a number of different items to prep for the second chunk or second module, which includes getting into modifying or updating the town zone districts, the use regulations and standards, and then dimensional requirements. So that's where we'll be going here in the next few months, is starting to get into zoning regulations, kind of what types of land uses are allowed where. We're going to have some discussions about how do we consolidate the existing zone districts in town so that there aren't, I think, 26 or 28 of them. And then maybe have some discussions about dimensional requirements. And as part of that next module, we're working on some materials and coordinating a number of community engagement activities that'll probably be a handful or a few open houses where we'll invite folks to come in and give their input on proposed changes to the town's zone districts and what types of uses are allowed where.
That's gonna get spicy.
It is. Been looking forward to that for a long time.
Yep, that's a long time coming.
Really, I mean, that's kind of where our rubber's going to meet the road here. A lot of people are kind of waiting. Well, at least Michael is. Michael's chomping at the bit to talk.
Tim Leahy, probably.
Tim Leahy, yep, he's been waiting for someone to pay attention to his property and maybe entertain some different zoning. And
I keep telling him he can apply for it.
Charles Overy has talked to me about different ideas for his, and so yeah.
Cool.
Anything
That's-
else?
That's it.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Matt.
Matt.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a good night.
Thank you, you too.
And with that, manager's report. It's in the packet.
It's out there.
Planning director report. Was that what he just said? Anything else?
Yeah, unless you have any questions, I always try to encapsulate what we're working on. Midtown went to council and got approval. So that next step is final plan, final plat, and a subdivision improvement agreement.
And zoning officially.
And the zoning. And that, I want to talk about that real quickly. I won't belabor this. In the past, and certainly what I'm used to for 27 years, when a PUD comes through for preliminary plan, when all the heavy lifting, all the engineering is done, and it's done to a pretty high level, that's also when zoning gets approved, in my experience. Our code actually says something different. It says the zoning gets acted upon at final plan. And certainly Mike and I have gone back and forth on this. I think Belden was done one way and
Belden
Minturn.
was done final, Minturn North was done preliminary.
Right. For Midtown, we made the determination that in addition to Mike's interpretation and what he prefers and what he thinks is best practice, don't give zoning to someone unless they have an actually approved subdivision final plat. All their drawings are done, their subdivision is legalized, then they can have zoning, rather than giving someone zoning and hoping that they come through for the final steps in the PUD process, and then you've got this zone district hanging out there. And I think he's right. So we're gonna handle that zoning and final plan, final plat, all that stuff when Jeff comes back in. The school district, we're still working through the referral process with the applicant for the subdivision at Molloy Park. So Tom Braun, their planner, is responding to the referral comments that we received from CDOT and CPW and the town engineer, and so he's still working through that.
I have a question about that. Are they changing the whole plan? Because I heard they're going with Habitat for Humanity.
I have not heard that.
Yeah, I've gotten emails about that and
No,
how they're gonna have them come in.
I have not heard that. So, but we'll give you some heads up when we feel like that application is going to get noticed for public hearing. And Amanda, you've had questions about the 2011 annexation agreement in the past and wanting Richard or Mike to come kind of talk about that. What is it? What do we, anything in that agreement bounds our review to, like, here's your box, you can only ask these questions because these things have already been decided. I think that was the nature of your.
That was the nature of my questions, but after our training, I held off on all my questions because it's really like you guys have to come and tell us based on that training. So that's why that was stopped. I didn't want to ask it prematurely.
Yep.
Because it needs to come with the package.
It does, yeah. And so we'll make sure that that is part of our presentation of,
Yeah.
let's give some background before we get into the meat of the design of the subdivision standards and whether they meet them or not. We'll give some context to that. But I don't anticipate that coming forth anytime soon, maybe within a couple months.
Scott, if and when that day comes, that I know we don't have executive sessions anymore or closed door meetings anymore. Where is the gray area between what we, like, if we all want to have a work session type discussion, maybe with public invited, et cetera, to talk about what we can and can't. I'm just going further on what our concerns are. Like, are we gonna get briefed by Mike? Here's what you can do, and here's what you can't do.
I think that would actually happen during the public hearing.
It would. In a way of, we ask a question and Mike says,
No.
disregard that.
Possibly. But if we can set this up and set you up for success by spending some time kind of reviewing the 2011 agreement, the 2011 zoning that happened on the property, everything that kind of feeds into the context of here's your box, right? These things are fair game, these probably aren't. I'm oversimplifying it,
Yeah,
but I see what you're saying, but I don't know a good way to do that. If we're not really doing executive sessions and we can't.
it's just not gonna work anymore.
There's been enough case law, something happened at the state legislature, or at the state level that it sent all the municipal attorneys into panic mode to say, okay, we're not doing executive sessions anymore. As usual, someone got sued or something happened, right? I don't think we could workshop that or work session it. I think it just needs to be, we need to do a good job of kind of trying to inform you the best we can on what our interpretation of those agreements are and how that does or does not affect your actions reviewing a subdivision.
Maybe could I ask that in the packet, when the packet comes out for that?
Yeah.
There could just be a lot of language about what we can and can't talk about, and that way it's out there if somebody wants to read it, it's in the public, and if they don't read it, too bad, but at least we've been briefed.
I'd anticipate it to be in both staff's
staff report as well as a fairly detailed memo from Mike or Richard.
Yeah, cause it just seems awkward
I
to
mean,
be
I just
asking a
know.
question and being like, no, you can't ask that,
Right.
please strike that, or I'll allow it. Yeah, it's not a court hearing.
We'll
Well, it
definitely want
is.
some of your time at that point to go over running the meeting for that, because you know you're gonna have a room full of people. And
It's
I
gonna
wanna
be
make
full.
sure I absolutely do not do anything wrong.
It's gonna be probably one of the biggest meetings I would expect.
Ever had, I would think.
Yeah, in my time
Wow.
here.
Yeah. It is, I don't think it's gonna, yeah.
There was one, what was it that we had? There were like 65, 70 people in this room. What was it?
We had one close to that size, I feel, for 151 Main. And then we had
Winter North, we had some big ones,
Minter North, we had some really big ones.
like full rooms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People sitting on the ground.
Mic drop.
No chairs anymore.
I mean, I projected this is gonna be similar, to be honest.
Yeah, I would think so. And I think, I've already heard a fair amount of comments just about the public safety side of things in terms of wildfires and evacuation routes and one road in, one road out, and all that kind of stuff is all like pretty important.
Yeah. Well, we should probably stop talking about it
Yes.
since it's a live application.
Yes.
Next thing on the list is the Highlands. Hopefully, we're all going to see you maybe next Wednesday night for the open house. Do you know that we have a
4:30 to 7:30?
I won't be
4:30
here.
is?
I'll be on the boat.
Oh, nice.
Where you going?
I can't tell you.
Oh,
It's a secret.
Okay.
okay.
Yeah. So
Did you
we
fill out the questionnaire
survey.
survey?
That did not work.
It's only 4 questions.
I'll try.
I want to talk real briefly about that because we've gotten great responses. We have 124 responses to the survey since a week and a half ago. A week ago. In working with Michelle to kind of figure out what the survey questions would be, she directed me to the 2024 community survey, which had a question or two about, hey, if we get these parcels, what do you think we should do with them? It was pretty basic, open space or development or combination of choices. I took from those questions and tried to be a little bit more specific. Ask the same question a different way. If we have these parcels now, and it's assumed that the town needs to generate some revenue, which would offset perhaps water rates and or the cost of a new water treatment plant. Let's assume that all these options will generate some amount of money. So I kind of put that aside. That's a given. But given that, do you favor more open space preservation or land conservation or some type of development, residential development? And then if you choose one of those two things, you get directed to, if you chose open space, what kind of open space? Full access, full trails, trailheads, parking lots, Disneyland, or something a little less than that, or pure wildlife protection, no access or limited access, to get a little bit more specific. Same thing with development. If you favor some amount of development, is it a little bit of development clustered into pods and then more open space preservation, or no controls, lots of development? And I tried not to speculate on whether one scenario would be more revenue for the town than the other. Most people would say if you sell it to a developer and they max it out, it's going to be pretty valuable for the town. But I didn't want to load the questions or lead people that way. Gusty was a little disappointed that we didn't have more information in the questions that really got to the point that everyone knew that we were going to sell these parcels for money. And I told him, I'm like, well, I didn't want to craft it that way and lead people. So it's just one survey, but I think hopefully it gives us some more clear direction. And then going into the open house, we're going to have some maps and some photos of the property. We're probably going to have boards that kind of put the same questions as a survey up on a board and try to get people's reaction during the open house to the same questions, kind of a preference survey, and probably give people an opportunity to write in suggestions on what they think the right use is or things they'd like to see. So The goal of this obviously is to get public input to a very important decision by the town of how they're going to dispose of these or use these parcels. And, you know, my personal preference is that we do end up with a direction of mostly land conservation. I've invited Devin Duval from CPW to be here. He and I had an hour-long conversation this morning about the Highlands and about the decision that the town has to make and some of his concerns, not only with that, but other areas of town. I've invited Marcia Gillis, the Director of Open Space for Eagle County. I haven't heard from her if she's going to attend. Jessica Fowlis, our Director at EVLT, is going to hopefully attend. So if people have questions for conservation specialist, if this were to be conserved, how does that work? You know, does the Eagle Valley Land Trust step in and hold the conservation easement? Who gets the money? How does that happen? Hopefully they can be here and help answer some of those questions.
You're not gonna have that open house on Zoom, are you?
Was not planning on it,
Okay,
no.
thanks.
Wouldn't be a bad idea.
I would attend if it was on Zoom.
I don't know how to moderate it on Zoom while also interacting with the public in the room.
There won't be
Since
any,
it's no, people getting up to the podium to speak, it's a lot less controlled.
Well, can't we just have like a wide lens on the camera and just have the mics on in the room and just let people listen in? They don't.
Yeah, I think that could be, wouldn't that be dangerous? Like, it's not really.
Or if you-
Like having answer, question, answer, it's like true open house stuff.
It'd be
That's right,
really-
too, because not everybody comes at once, do they? I was gonna say, like, Devin could stand up and give a presentation that she could watch, but then people might still filter in later. And you
But
can't.
if you're the fly on the wall, you're still getting information and you just can't get to the meeting.
I would hesitate to do that also because, you know, this audio picks up everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if people, if we put a sign on the door and,
Can we hear it?
you know.
You are being watched.
Yeah,
Be polite. That only lasts for like 30 seconds. That's people's like, then they start.
That's so entertaining. It just is.
any other thoughts on the Highlands? Okay,
I have one question that came up that night about the drone footage.
yeah.
I can get you drone footage, but is it useful with all the snow?
We have enough on our plate just getting ready for the open house. I don't know how I would. I mean, if someone wants to do drone footage and edit it and have it running on a screen, that's awesome.
And I can take Luke out there in 10
It'd be
minutes.
better if you could find
I
drone
just don't
footage.
know if people can understand it as well as just a Google map aerial of here it is and here's the zone, here's where your table on road is and here's where we're talking. To see it in the winter time, it's a little harder to understand than it is the summer.
I mean, I just want to get drone footage with moose on top
And wolves.
of
You just wanna let-
it. Get.
Did you see the video? Oh, no, off topic, but we were driving by the other night. I should have told Hawkeye. And the moose was just walking down the sidewalk in front of Hawkeye's house.
I saw the video of it walking down Main Street in Southtown.
Phyllis saw it because she was coming back with Ella in the car from dinner. And she texted Hawkeye and said, "Hawkeye, the moose is outside your window. He wants to come in and have dinner with you."
Slowly walking by.
It was up on Taylor today. Kevin saw it.
It was at Layton Lay's house on Monday.
Did Deb tell you how many they saw in the helicopter?
I heard it was a bunch.
14.
14?
Ow.
What?
14.
Down in Malloy.
14 moose.
14?
14 moose.
When?
2 weeks ago.
No.
All together in a group?
Well, they could see them all from the helicopter. They counted 14.
Oh, okay.
That's awesome.
All in that area.
Just, that's like the wolf are gonna very much.
This one, because it's so mellow, it seems, nobody's really complaining about it. Like it's gonna attack him. My friend Cheryl was at Tim Lay's house. She came over from Buena Vista and she's friends with them. And she said, they opened the door to go out and the moose was right there in the yard looking at a tree. And she said, it's healthy, but it's thin, so it's really hungry. And the moose looked up at her and she goes, As I said, don't even think of disturbing me. But it
apparently,
didn't do anything. I mean, it just kept on eating.
they say nobody's complained.
Hmm.
Apparently, somebody called Jay on Monday when we were all off from MLK Day, and she was just like, "What am I supposed to do about a moose? Call dispatch, I guess, if it's interfering with traffic."
Somebody put up another video and it was Officer Vasquez with the lights on. He was just slowly walking
Yep.
down the sidewalk and he's behind him with the lights on and they're playing the Bad Boys, Bad Boys.
Yes, that's the one I saw. Yeah, that's in Southtown.
I'm gonna have to look at this.
The moose perp.
I just think of Alaska where they're in the towns with the people all the time.
Well, I rolled down the window in front of Hawkeye's house and I yelled at him, I go, "You're not in Alaska, bro."
If there's not,
Amanda has one.
No, I have no more comments. I was just going to future meetings.
Oh.
well, couple more things. The housing group that I'm participating in, the Regional Housing Task Force and Assessment, they're getting really close to presenting their final report with recommendations that, rather than being prescriptive to each of the towns, where housing should go or how the town should do things, just giving them more of a menu of, here's what we know. Here's, after all this study, here's where we know our gaps in housing are. Here's the number of units that we think we're short. Here's the things that we think you can do as individual communities to take as different tools that suit you and your community. So that I think that's going to be rolled out to the town boards and councils in March, late February, March. And then lastly, the Wildland Urban Interface Code Working Group. Kevin Rindy has really taken over that. As a former firefighter in the Valley, I kind of pawned off my participation in that group on him and said, you might be better suited for this. I've attended several meetings. I haven't attended a couple, but they're continuing to work through their own different modules of potential wildland urban interface codes. I think the latest thing that they've been focusing on are things that probably will affect us. We know that the state's coming out with a kind of a mandatory wildland urban interface state mandated code, which might dictate how we treat landscaping around buildings, which might dictate things that we have to implement through our building code. This local working group has most recently been working on landscape regulations. So looking at each jurisdiction, what our existing land use or landscaping requirements are or restrictions, and then working to find some common ground with regard to defensible space around structures, the types of tree species that we might recommend in our landscaping requirements and things like that. So if our local group is taking a less prescriptive, heavy hand, they've also let us know that the state is working on stuff that could be Big Brother telling us what to do. So just be aware of that.
And we, for what you understand, like we don't, it's not like building code where towns can opt out of parts of building codes. We probably would not have that option.
My understanding is that no, some aspects would be mandatory. But I'm not an expert on what the state's developing and if there would be any off-ramps or incentives to opt out of stuff, I don't know. And then the exterior lighting ordinance got approved, so now we have a distinct definition of holiday lighting and festoon lighting. If you have festoon lighting, you're good to go.
I've been losing sleep over it.
Every day. Every day.
All right, that's all I got.
Okay, future meetings, February 12th, who's here and who's not?
I'm here.
Amanda?
I'm here on February 12th.
I'm not here. It's my wife's 50th birthday.
How exciting!
I can't miss that.
No, you cannot.
Be in doghouse for sure.
February 26th.
Not here.
Is that winter break?
It is winter break. If you need me, I can be on Zoom.
Yeah, I'll be on Zoom too because I'll be in Arizona.
On the 26th.
So, and I mean, I can be on Zoom. So you just let me know.
It looks like we don't have a quorum. I'll let you know.
Okay, yeah. Otherwise, I'll take it off. I'll be in Cabo. That is not my boat. My boat. I leave next Wednesday morning for on a boat.
So
I'll be on boat.
I'm going to ask for an adjournment of the meeting and then I'm gonna say a little something.
Do not say anything negative about boats because I'm
No, this is just something that shocked me last night, Kelly.
I make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting of January 22nd,
May I have a
2025.
second?
Second.
Motion by Amanda, second by Jeff, all in favor?
Aye.
I was at HP